Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure it is a good morning. It's pretty vile outside, actually. But anyway, welcome to everybody. Dan, are we ready to start? Are we live now? Are we live now? Okay. Welcome to Cambridgeshire County Council Strategy and Resources Committee. The council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask though that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds at any point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs out of the main entrance and turn left, and the muster point is at the far end of the building. Item 1 on our agenda is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Sam Hoy, and Councillor Matt Maguire is subbing for her, and also Councillor Graham Wilson and Councillor Slatter is subbing for him.
Thank you very much. And second is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on items on the agenda? Councillor Gough.
Yes, with respect to the item on the mobile contract, I wanted to declare that I'm a previous employee of Vodafone. Therefore, I will not take part in that discussion or the vote.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning. Under the next agenda item, the action log, and I'm sure we will be discussing this, I must formally declare that I represent the County Council on FACT, which is a community transport provider which is involved in some of the bus services. I won't be saying anything to do with FACT at all.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. The next item on the agenda are the minutes and the action log. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting of the 30th of September as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? I see no hands, no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as accurate, so I will take that as carried unanimously. And I will sign the minutes in a moment. The next, so an updated action log is also included in the published papers for this meeting. There is one action which will be considered as part of agenda item 4. Are there any comments on the action log? Councillor Cant, Steve.
Sorry, Chair, I just realised you said that's going to be considered as part of agenda item number 4. I'm just didn't expect that, so I'm just looking to see how that fits in and where we're doing that. Yeah, it's really a standalone item. So are we going to slot it into there, or should we not get an update from you first as to what went on yesterday? Obviously, I wasn't there. So if we could have an update, and then, or do you particularly want it in number 4 and update us then?
Is this the buses item?
Yeah. Yeah, you said there's one action log, which is the bus item, and you said that we'll be handling that under 4. I didn't expect it to be handled under 4. I expected it to be a standalone item. So I'm just asking, is that necessary to handle it there, or can we have it as a standalone item now?
I'm happy if you'd rather cover buses now.
Okay, in which case, could I ask that you update us on what happened at the meeting yesterday with regards to that? Thank you, Chair.
I will try and update you, but I will need to be careful about what I'm allowed to say because of the there's a standstill period after tenders have been received, so I can't give any additional information. So I will hope that what I say doesn't go beyond the press release which went out from the Combined Authority, I think on Tuesday evening, which is that tenders have been received for the vast majority of the routes that were covered. And again, if you want to know the precise details of which routes have been tenders have been received for, that's in the Combined Authority's press release. Work is ongoing to cover the routes for which tenders were not received. And my understanding is that the Combined Authority are themselves able to cover the cost of those tenders. Do you have further questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Because basically, you're reiterating what the press release basically says. The routes are saved. We only need a certain amount of money. We can't go into much detail. But the March Chatteris was referred to in the officer release as one of the areas that is still open for tender. However, my understanding of the situation is there were 40 routes at risk. There were 22 amber, 18 red. 14 red are now having some kind of closed discussion about what is or isn't going ahead. And, you know, it's come out that everything has been saved, where actually the vast majority have been altered immensely beyond recognition. A number haven't been saved. We're not clear on the details of what's going to happen. But yeah, my residents want to know exactly what's happening. And the fact is that the vast majority have something running on there, but nothing like where they first started. So I think it's a long way off the mark there, Chair.
So I'm not in a position this morning without having spoken to or had more detail from officers at the Combined Authority about other routes beyond those which were discussed. If you would like more information, I'm sure it will be possible to arrange for you to have a meeting with Paul Nelson, who is the Combined Authority's bus expert. But my understanding is that there are very severe constraints over what can be done over routes which are continuing to be commercially run, and therefore the ability of any organisation to interfere with commercially run routes is limited. There was quite a lot of discussion at the Combined Authority yesterday, as Councillor Bowden will be able to also report, of the deeply unsatisfactory situation with the way in which bus services are regulated. And I hope very much that when we have a government, they will look again at the way in which bus services are regulated and how we can change those regulations to enable councils of various different kinds and Combined Authorities to have more control over how bus services are run, and in particular to try and make sure that bus companies are not able to withdraw routes with quite the same lack of warning that is present at the moment. But I'm not willing to talk about individual routes on today because I just don't have the information or the knowledge to be able to do that. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. Well, you and I are in a position where we actually do know that information. We were just not allowed to say. And I think both of us said at the meeting yesterday, we only wish we could say what was in the exempt papers, but there's a very good legal reason why we cannot reveal any of that information. So I fully agree with you about that. But the mayor is going around on Radio Cambridgeshire this morning saying the problem has been solved. And what we know is that the majority of routes which have been affected by the stagecoach changes haven't been subject to any amelioratory action by the Combined Authority. Only 5 of the amber routes had even been put out to tender. This is information which was put into the public arena by the officers yesterday. I'm not revealing anything I shouldn't. And we also know, as was said, that those routes which have been subject to tender haven't necessarily resulted in services being tendered for which are on a like-for-like basis with the services which exist at the moment. So we have a situation where Monday week, we are going to have literally thousands of people not being able to use the bus services that they are able to use today, because either the service has completely gone, or that part of the service they use has gone, or there have been timetable changes which make it impossible for them effectively to use them for the purposes that they currently use them. Or in one case, which is not in the exempt paper, so I can't talk about it, in one case where services have been reduced by 50%, when at peak hours, those services are 100% full already. So we already know that the service which will be provided from Monday week will not be able to accommodate the number of individuals who use those services at the moment, and people are going to be left behind at the bus stops. Now, we know all of this. And it's not just that we know it, Lucy, us personally, because we've seen those exempt papers, but the County Council knows it as well. So this explains why the County Council yesterday put out a letter saying that parents can now claim 40 pence per mile to transport their children to and from school and have the empty legs as well, 4 journeys a day. They can claim 40 pence a mile from the County Council if, because of the changes taking place Monday week, they're not able to get their children to school and back because of the bus service changes. So what the mayor is currently claiming, that the problem has been solved, basically is not true. There are large numbers of people who are going to be really severely affected, and there's going to be an effect on this County Council and our finances as a result of where there is a statutory obligation to provide transport for children to and from school. The changes mean that that can no longer be satisfied by Stagecoach, and now is going to have to be satisfied, it appears, by direct payments coming from the County Council to parents to recompense them for the car journeys they're now going to have to take. And that car journey point is a very pertinent one, because Lucy, you laughed at me yesterday at the meeting when I read out what I'd put out to my residents saying, if you've got a car on these journeys which are clearly going to be oversubscribed and which are going to leave people at the bus stops, if you've got a car, please use your car rather than using the bus to leave space on the bus for those people who've got no choice but to use the bus. And you actually laughed at me when I said that. And the reason that I've put it out is because Monday week, what are people meant to do if they're left at the bus stop? Last buses being cancelled, as is the case that I was giving an example of. 50% of service, people just can't travel. How are they meant to get to and from work? How are they meant to get to and from school safely? And this issue just hasn't been addressed. Now, if there had been more money available to the Combined Authority and what they were doing, and I have to say, the Combined Authority officers who've been tasked with this exercise have done a tremendous job in the very limited time they were given. I think it needs to be placed on record that no blame should be attached to the Combined Authority officers. But they were given an impossible task to fulfill in a relatively short space of time. Now, we don't need to go back on the fact that the mayor failed to get the money and all the rest of it. That's gone. It's something to be held to account afterwards. But as far as the situation Monday week is concerned, it really is important that residents understand that there are problems. They're going to have to find alternative solutions. And in particular, with respect to this authority, as far as school transport is concerned, that now we are having to put our hands into our pockets in the County Council and start subsidising individuals using their private cars. No mention has been made, however, of those parents who don't have a car or who aren't able to use their car to transport their children to and from school to make up for the lost bus services. What are they meant to do? Are they meant to get taxis? In which case, are they going to have to find the money for the taxis out of their own pocket and just be subsidised on the 40 pence per mile, which has been offered by the County Council? What's going to happen to poorer parents who can't manage to do that? Now, these are important issues, and we're talking about less than 2 weeks away. And it's vitally, vitally important that people are, first of all, told the truth, to the extent that we can, and I fully accept, Lucy, that you and I can't reveal anything which was in those exempt papers yesterday, but they're told the truth that there can be a problem, and secondly, that solutions are provided beyond that which the County Council did yesterday. And I don't know if you were responsible for this, Lucy. If you were, I give you full credit. It was only in the morning that I made my point about the fact that people will sometimes need to use their cars instead of the buses now. And it was exactly that same day, only a few hours later, the county council put out this letter saying exactly what I said. And if you're responsible for that, then I give you credit for that. If not, then okay, I'll just be grateful that they were listening to what I was saying. But we have a significant issue here, and we can't brush it under the carpet. And I'm sorry to say, we can't just cover the back of the mayor all the time for things which have gone wrong and things which aren't going right now when he's claiming that they are. It's really important for local residents.
Thank you. I've got a number of other hands now. So Richard, I think you were next, and then Lorna.
Well, I don't want to prolong this because what we're hearing and seeing is just a political attack. It's not about bus services. And when people talk about putting out communications to residents, I'm afraid the attacks we heard 2 days ago in the council chamber and have been replicated here are against a Labour mayor. You know, what we have is a privatised bus service that never provided a good service to a lot of people in Cambridgeshire in the first place. And that unilaterally, the provider cut services, and a Labour mayor has come in and restored 14 out of 18 of those services. And in some cases, those services are slightly changed. Sometimes the better, sometimes the worse, no doubt. And some of that will come out in the wash. But if it's about giving credit, give credit to the mayor who's actually come in with our support. And I sat in this room at this committee 20 days ago, hearing the Conservatives saying that we should put in a vast amount of Cambridgeshire County Council money in advance to secure these bus reinstatements. And that's managed to be happened within the combined authority budget, saving this council money. Okay, I hear the point. Maybe there will be some additional finance. I hear the point, perfectly proper point. But there should be some humility on behalf of the opposition that they were saying that we should spend far more that we actually haven't been forced to spend. And we've got to think about what we can do to support providing the best bus service possible. And I think the leader, the board of the combined authority and the mayor do deserve great credit for what they have done. And it would be good if that was acknowledged in this council rather than petty attacks on the Labour mayor, which in this case, he's done an outstanding job and he deserves the credit.
Thank you, Lorna.
Thank you. This debate is somewhat hampered by the fact that there are two people in this room who know what's going on and all the rest of us don't. So I'm going to caveat my remarks, and I think on everybody else's behalf, their remarks with that comment that there is information we do not know, most of us do not know, and which will not be made public until Monday. It seems to me that what has happened in terms of reinstating not just 14, but I believe 16 or maybe even 17 services now, as the board heard yesterday, and almost all of the 18th service, which is one that serves my residents, though I appreciate not council accounts if someone can't be found to do the March to Chatteris stretch of that route. That has been an amazing feat. It's not just those services, but also reinstating the extensions of some of the services that had been proposed to be truncated. For example, the City 8 that serves my village and other nearby villages that was due to be stopped at Cottenham rather than carrying on out towards my division. So all of that has been an amazing piece of work in a very short time, under the amount of money that the combined authority had set aside for this purpose. And that is deeply to the combined authority's credit, and particularly the officers who have worked tirelessly to try and pull that together. That said, yes, what Stagecoach has proposed, I don't know, only Councillor Bowden and yourself, Chair, know the details of the timetables, is not going to be, as I understand it, likely to be 100% reinstatement of the service that was existing heretofore. And there are other changes that have been proposed or announced by Stagecoach that will affect other services negatively, but which aren't removals of service. And that's regrettable, and I hope that we can find solutions to that, not least the Greater Cambridge Partnership making connections proposals, and other things that may well be on the table, move towards franchising, for example. There are things that can be done in the future, and maybe even in the fairly near future, to resolve some of those situations and provide Cambridgeshire with the functioning public transport network it needs. But given that we are operating under the 1985 Act, the deregulation of bus provision, the system we now have whereby providers like Stagecoach simply go to the traffic commissioners and say, here, we're doing this profitable stuff, and the public purse will have to pick up the unprofitable stuff that we don't want to do. That's no way to ensure a functioning public network. And under those circumstances, there are enormous limits and constraints to what we can do. And we can't sort that out in a fortnight. That is absolutely ludicrous as an attack upon the combined authority and upon members in this chamber. It's not possible to sort all of that in a fortnight and bust through the absolutely broken 1985 model that we now have. We need to move beyond that. We need franchising. We need a reliable source of sufficient income to come in to make franchising a possibility. And we need all of that to work, but that's not going to be done in 2 weeks flat. And frankly, I think absolute credit should go to those who have done everything they can to try and mop up after the mess left by Stagecoach. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a couple of comments and then draw this discussion to a close, if I may. Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. So feel free.
Thank you. I want to simplify this a little bit, but at the same time, I'm pretty fed up. I sit here, I'm trying to do the best for my residents, for my patch. I'm pretty fed up with hearing about political attacks all the time. You know, just because we have a different of opinion, and you can smile all you like, that's fine. But you know, this is grassroots stuff. Yeah, don't happen to like where we are, do we? I've said this before, but you know, we're here. We just heard about 2 weeks to sort this out. Well, actually, it's 2 weeks plus 20 days if we'd have done something. You know, we didn't want to spend the money 20 days ago. But if that option was in there, instead of being 14 or 16 or whatever the number is now, we don't know what that number is. Instead of those, you know, those routes potentially being saved. Now, these routes we're talking about that are potentially being saved, we've not got any guarantee that they're completely saved. They've just moved to the amber route. Now, the amber route means, and I'll give you an example. I don't want to be parochial because we can all do this. Warboys is in my patch. One of the buses that goes from Ramsey to the Park and Ride to go to Cambridge is no longer going to stop in Warboys. That's going to be replicated all over the county. So do you know what? You know, we laud it up that it's, you know, there's been something's been saved. It hasn't been saved. This is, you know, but we had 20 days ago an opportunity that we didn't want to take, but it was a suggestion to help out and try. You know, maybe we would have given the officers a little bit of a leg up. Do something to help out. No, you don't have to pull the faces, but yeah, this is fairly, you know, straightforward stuff. You know, and as for having an attack at, you know, Dr. Nick, we're getting very well with Dr. Nick. I have done for some time. This wasn't about an attack at him 20 days ago. This was to help him out. This was to help our residents. But let's not forget what's on the table at the moment isn't until March. And then what's on the table as well, we're going into half term. We can't do anything for the 10 days. I understand that completely. You know, that 10 days finishes at the beginning of the half term. Then, you know, it stopped. By the end of the half term, the services have changed or stopped. What do we do? So there's a simple question. This is what I say about bringing it back to being simple. What do we do then? Because what we've done at the moment isn't enough. 20 days ago, we had a chance to do something different. And I'm sorry, I'm going to leave it there, but I do feel really strongly about this. And I'm a little bit sick and tired of, you know, the bickering and and I'll say that to the whole room. You know, that's not just to you sat across there, it's to the whole room. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think I will now draw this one to a close, but I've got a couple of comments I want to make. First of all, Steve, in response to what you've just said, I think the frustration about what we are and are not able to do with bus services is felt right around this room. And I have to say that actually, I've been a councillor for well over 15 years now. For the whole of that time, there's been massive frustration about what we are not able to do with bus services. And this is not a new problem. The way in which Stagecoach have behaved this autumn has been spectacularly awful, kind of on a whole different league of awfulness. But residents' frustrations about bus services being changed and moved and withdrawn at short notice is not a new problem. And we have been, as councillors, complaining about that for a number of years, trying to get changes I certainly know that I've written to council officers many times as an opposition councillor saying residents are concerned about this, and the response has come back, it's a commercial service, there is nothing we can do about it. So this is not something that has suddenly popped up, and it's not something that is was not flagged in the past as something that caused residents much concern. There are new issues that we urgently need to deal with in terms of the cost of fuel, the cost of living crisis, that mean that actually providing decent, reliable public transport is more urgent than ever, before you even get into the needs of the urgency of the climate change issue. So we absolutely need to be reviewing this very urgently to try and make sure we do have a reliable public transport system across the whole of Cambridgeshire. That is something that is being discussed a lot at the Combined Authority, where there is now a review happening again of whether we can go down the franchising route, which would make a huge difference to the control that the Combined Authority can have over which routes are run where, when, and when the timetables are and all that kind of thing. But we cannot do that without franchising. It also, that the constraints on students being able to use services are also part of the 1985 Act that Lorna referred to. And we really need to see what we can do as an area to try and review all of those things. There is work going on at the Combined Authority, and there is work going on at the Greater Cambridge Partnership. And I really hope that the very strong support that there has been for bus services from Conservative members today will feed into a really positive discussion at the Combined Authority and to do with those GCP proposals, which are one of the ways in which we can support bus services. So I hope that will be a constructive conversation. The thing that I'm going to ask Dan to do is to put something on our action log to say, could we have a members briefing on bus services? Because this is obviously going to be a massive issue for the whole council for the next year at least, because Steve is right about the issues that are coming down the track in March. And I think it's important that members of this council have a good knowledge about what is and is not possible. So if we could put that on the action log, that would be very helpful. At which point, I would really like to move on, Chris. If you're going to come back in, can you make it very brief?
Really briefly, just asking you if you could answer the two questions I raised. The first is about this 40 pence per mile offer which was made by the county council. I don't think that has managed to get out to parents, and how are we going to make sure that parents are aware of that as quickly as possible? And then the second thing is, what is going to happen to those parents who haven't got access to a private car and aren't able to, and just can't afford to get a taxi? Something needs to be done for people in that situation. I've got residents who've been contacting me about it. I'm sure that there are many other members who've got similar residents asking them about the question, and they need answers. Can you give some answer to them at least, or at least let them know when an announcement will be made? We've only got 10 days to go.
So I know that our school transport team are working very hard on it. It was them that sent the thing out yesterday. I will get them to respond to you, Chris, but I'm not going to respond in this meeting because I will not be able to do that accurately. Thank you. At which point I think we might move on from the action log to the next item on the agenda, which is public petitions and public questions. I'm not aware that there are any petitions or public questions. And then the next item after that is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report, which I have down for Stephen Howarth, who will probably appear on our screens shortly.
Yes, hello, Chair. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? I can see you reacting. Apologies for the lack of camera. but I'll introduce this report fairly briefly. This is, as committee will be aware, the overall management accounts for the council and the detailed management accounts for this committee's services up to the end of August 2022. It is pre-September, so still refers to old structure names, etc., which will be updated from the September report onwards. Committee will see the headline position and key issues set out in the executive summary of the report from page 12. I'll run through those briefly. So on the revenue side, there is a forecast overspend of £2.2 million at the end of August, which is about 0.5% of the revenue budget. The drivers of that remain pretty much the same as I think have been reported to this committee on the last two occasions. The main driver being staff pay, which is reported in that corporate services line, where the current national offer of the pay award, if applied to all scales, would exceed the budget provision we've made for that, which is about a 3.5% increase on average. Within the sort of higher risk demand-led services of the council, which are predominantly, as you'll know, in people services, there's no real net forecast of over or underspend at this stage of the year yet. You'll see if you look at Appendix 1, there are some offsetting, slightly more minor over and underspends. But those budgets are, as I say, the higher risk ones. They are under regular review by the finance team and by the relevant service. Potentially more will come out on that in the sort of third quarter of the year. But like I say, under very detailed review. There's one matter related to funding to bring the committee's attention to, and that is subject to a recommendation, which is recommendation A, which is around the Ukraine schemes and the grants that the government are giving us for a selection of things related to that. Those are substantial grants, particularly the Homes for Ukraine scheme itself, and in part are expected to be passed on to the district councils, which recommendation A in the report facilitates, delegating the responsibility to sort of agree and pass the funding on to the Section 151 officer. The grant conditions for those grants are fairly clear about what the spend needs to be on, and it requires a joined up approach across the local government sector in Cambridgeshire. On the capital side, the second part of the sort of key issues, there's an underspend forecast of £2 million at the end of August on the net capital budget, which is about 1.2%. The forecast at this stage is in people services, specifically on mainly on schools. We're reviewing in some detail the other capital forecasts with the relevant services now that we're 6 months into the financial year. And you'll see more underpinning detail and commentaries deeper in the report about both the revenue and capital position. Then one capital thing to bring to the committee's attention, and is the other recommendation in the report. Committee and members will be aware, particularly from some of their service committee papers, that we are seeing rising costs on many of the capital schemes due to inflation. And we're also seeing quotes for works not being held for very long by contractors in many cases, particularly due to the fluctuating costs of materials. That can cause an increase in overall scheme cost if we aren't able to respond to quotes quickly enough, but also because of that can cause slippage. So recommendation B of the report would put in place a short-term arrangement by which the Section 151 officer could agree up to 5% variation on the agreed funding envelope for schemes that have reached a certain milestone in their development. The report sets out a little bit more background on that, but Chair, with your agreement, I would suggest an alteration slightly to this recommendation, which would be after the word Section 151 officer in recommendation B to add in consultation with the relevant policy and service committee chair, just to add in that extra layer, extra bit of governance in for the Section 151 officer in agreeing any variations in line with that recommendation. I'll leave the introduction there, Chair, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you for mentioning the alteration, which I think is needed, and thanks to other members who've raised that. Any questions or comments on this, Steve?
If I can just raise one point of order before we move to open debate. As you're aware, you've just acknowledged, I put forward the amendment that Stephen Howarth has just announced as an alteration. I put that forward. I sent it to all group leaders. I sent it to Democratic Services. I sent it to Stephen Howarth, and I said it'd be great if we could just have this as an alteration, which has happened. If not, it's going to be an amendment on the day. And I haven't received a response from anybody whatsoever. So the first time I actually was aware of what we were going to do today is waiting for Stephen Howarth's acknowledgement. So I think that's a bit remiss, really.
That is absolutely remiss, Steve, and I apologise for that. I thought I had responded to you, but obviously I had responded to a different group of people that didn't include you. So my apologies for that. And thank you for raising it because it was absolutely right. Any other comments on the paper more broadly, Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The first point I wish to raise is about the really the problems with the staffing. It's covered a lot in 1.3.2 under children's education. It's got to such a point that you've created a children's workforce program board. And it's not just children's, it's across the entire organisation. You've been hemorrhaging staff for various reasons. This is one of the most vital things in delivering our services is our staff. So there's a direct question is which member will be taking the lead on that board alongside the officers because it's so important. On other things on the paper that I want to pick up, the one is about the lack of deliverability on a lot of the capital schemes. Right now, I'll be talking about some of them in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I just think it's unacceptable that you have one solar scheme after another, one money generating scheme after another, get delayed and delayed, and with inflation as it is at the moment, the costs go up and up and up. But then you come out with, it comes out and says, it doesn't matter if we're going over budget because the cost of electricity is so much now that we're going to get that back as rising electricity prices later on. Because I'm sorry, Chair, but if they were delivered on time, you'd actually have that uplift in the electricity prices to deal with some of the budget gap. So I don't think that you should allow one to offset the failure in the other. And put it across that way. There are reasons why things get delayed, but it's not acceptable to say it's okay. I want to move on to the budget gap because there are a number of points in this paper, and we have a whole paper on the budget gap later on, and there are reasons why it is going up to £28 million. And some of those reasons are external, such as inflation, demography, but there's a lack of recognition in the budget gap paper about some of the ones that are actually internal and driven by the policies of the current joint administration. These are recognised across the piece in the actual revenue paper. So, for example, 3A talks about the lack of money coming in for advertising, and that is directly attributed to the changes of policies of what could be allowed to be advertised. Clear restriction on junk food, for example, having a negative impact on the county's finances. Other areas, such as the changes that this land that you've made, are actual real. They're actually make a difference to the bottom line. As welcome as they are in the junk food, as welcome as it may be, it just needs to be recognised that some things are internal, widening the budget gap, and others aren't. In terms of the capital delivery programme, I'm just going to Oakenbury Weald Special School a year late, Surham Primary a year late. Wisbech Secondary, I think that's been abandoned now because we don't hear any more about it, despite the promises that were made. Half of all the cycling schemes moved to next year. St Neots Future High Street moved to next year. Girton to Oakington cycling scheme. Let's put it into next year, but in this particular case, we don't actually know if it can be delivered. These are all in the report. B1050 Shelfords Road, the budget of £800,000, not one penny spent this year, just move it all to next year. Babraham Energy Grid, yes, CC will be late delivering it, but as I said, don't worry about it because of rising energy prices. It would be nice to have these things delivered on time, and then actually we wouldn't be worried about the construction costs and the inflationary nature of them. So, as I said, it's an accurate report, but you need to accept that some of the budget gaps, the other one that's widening the budget gap was your commitment to the real living wage for the entire internal workforce, for the adults' external workforce, but not for the children's external workforce or others. But actually, not only did that widen the budget gap by £25 million over the 5 years last year in the budget predictions, but now it's recognised in the paper that that's widening even further because the estimates on where the real living wage would actually land were underestimated, and it's gone up higher than that. So whilst they are admirable, I just think you need to put some pen to paper and actually say which are your responsibilities for widening the gap and which are actually external responsibilities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's quite a lot there, so I'm going to come to Stephen first to respond on some of the staffing issues in particular.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Count raised the issue of the Children's Workforce Programme Board, so probably helpful to start with a few contextual remarks before I come on to the specifics for Cambridgeshire. First of all, children's workforce or qualified social workers within children's services are a national shortfall area across the whole of local government, not just Cambridgeshire. That's something that's been acknowledged by the LGA, which is putting more work into that area at national level, alongside work from Skills for Care, because adult social care is very rapidly becoming a similar national shortfall area, not just children's social care. The Workforce Programme Board that's referred to in the paper was referenced at the last meeting of Strategy and Resources as part of the Corporate Risk Register update. It's a board I've initiated. It's a board I personally chair as Chief Executive because we recognise the importance of our children's social work staff, and both the recruitment and retention of those employees is absolutely critical given the nature of the work they deliver. It's further important to say, however, that that is a matter of regular reporting to the Children and Young People's Committee already. So the Director of Children's Social Care reports on finance and vacancy positions at every meeting of the Children and Young People's Committee. I've certainly been present where that has been scrutinised by members from all parties in the past and will no doubt continue to do so. I guess there's another point, Chair, I would just generally make. Cambridgeshire County Council, like every employer in the county, is struggling to recruit and retain staff. Every employer I speak to, whether they're public, private or third sector, are struggling to find skilled staff for all manner of professions, not just in social work, and the County Council regrettably is no different. Perhaps if I can also refer members to a paper that you'll be discussing later on the agenda under corporate performance, just to say that the County Council's own turnover of staff, which is for September reported as around 15% for voluntary turnover, that is back to pre-pandemic levels. So that is no different to the position the County Council found itself in over 2 years ago in terms of voluntary turnover of staff. We are continuing to work hard at local and regional level to improve recruitment and retention in children's social care, and that will continue to receive the oversight it deserves from the Children and Young People's Committee. I hope those comments are helpful, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I may, Chair, yeah, thank you very much for that, Stephen. So, a couple of points there. And obviously, you can't comment on the policies that have widened the budget gap. That would be inappropriate. That's one for members to respond to. But in the terms of the work programme board, which I've read the report on that, and it seems to be a really effective piece of work going forward. The point I was making was this is absolutely intrinsic to the health of the county council and the health of our residents. So my question wasn't who does it report to, it was which member sits on it. And from what you're saying, it should be the chair of children's, but actually there is no member oversight on it. It is reported into the committee. So that was my understanding the answer. And I would suggest that if something of such importance does have an actual member presence. The other point I'd say is, whilst we've had a lot of answers in here for the children's board, for adults, for highways, we keep getting told about the national recruitment issues. But what we failed to see, despite numerous requests in various committees, is actually some benchmarking against other authorities. So we'd appreciate that. We don't know how accurate that is, but we'd appreciate some benchmarking on that, which has been requested often. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Richard next, unless you want to come back, Stephen.
Chair, just one brief comment, and I guess this is very much to the heart of Councillor Count's point around members sitting on programme boards. My personal advice and professional advice would be that programme board is discussing matters that are operational in nature rather than strategic or policy, which is clearly the roles and responsibilities of elected members. Therefore, while we're dealing with the operational matters, that's an issue delegated to myself and officers to address. We will, of course, continue to ensure that's reported and scrutinised by members. The Chair and Vice Chair of Children and Young People's Committee do also meet regularly with officers and are briefed on the situation on an ongoing basis. That's also subject to external regulatory scrutiny, as members know, but I'll clearly look at how we can reinforce the communication and oversight of members in respect of that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, I won't comment on what we've heard from Councillor Count. I rather had sympathy with what Councillor Cordy said earlier. We should all try and refrain from just doing tit for tat. So my comments on this report are on the report, not on what I've heard, even though the real living wage is a fantastic anti-poverty measure. I'll say no more. On recommendation B, I support it, but it is a bit of a recipe for inching up the capital programme. We know that current inflationary pressures and also bottlenecks in terms of supply is driving up the cost of capital projects, whether it's us as a county council, any other capital projects by businesses and others. That's just what's happening at the moment. But we also have to stress, and I'm sure it's there, but I think it should be said explicitly, we should also have to stress that we ask our officers, and we at this committee will continuously review and have overview, and it may be necessary to push some contracts back. It may be necessary to cancel some. It may be necessary for us to put more money into the capital programme, but that mustn't happen through the back door, through recommendation B. It must be something that is explicitly the role of this committee. And while I'm not on my feet, but metaphorically so, I don't know whether Tom answers this or Stephen, but this is a report up to the end of August, but what we've seen is a massive increase in interest rates. And if it's about what's the responsibility of an administration rather than external factors, I hope members of the opposition will at least reflect on that. But could our officers just talk about how much more we're paying in interest rates and what the financial burden of that is going to be on the authority, because I think that's generally an issue of public interest at the moment.
I'm happy to provide a brief response to that. Yep. So if the council was taking out borrowing sort of today, we would be paying interest rates that are quite a bit higher than they were 6 or 7 weeks ago. The council's cash flow position currently is relatively healthy, and our next borrowing is slated to be in sometime around March, April next year. We're not necessarily continuously taking out borrowing. We do so when we have a cash flow need to do so. But we will be keeping the day-to-day borrowing rates under very close review. And if there is a point at which it looks like it might be advantageous to take out borrowing slightly earlier than expected due to slightly more favourable interest rates, we will do so. But we do expect, with all the refinancing, etc., we will have to do come the end of the financial year into early next year, with interest rates being higher than they were a year ago, probably still then we expect there to be a financial cost to that, yes, which will probably form part of the budget papers as we get through into the December committees.
Thank you. Councillor Goldzak-Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Stephen, I think this is probably a question for you, and forgive my ignorance and forgive the question, but I'm really struggling with a bit of understanding. 1.3.4 on corporate services reads, corporate services are forecasting an overspend due to the expected level of staff pay inflation. We've just heard from the Chief Executive that we're dramatically understaffed and therefore we're not paying those wages. Can you help me understand that correlation, please?
Yep. So I suppose if we have a certain level of vacancies, yes, but we do have a substantial number of staff employed and a substantial pay bill.
Sorry, Stephen. Sorry to interrupt, Stephen. Substantial doesn't give me an indication. Substantial could be 90%. Substantial could be 30%. Can I have figures, please?
I'm not sure of the total pay bill off the top of my head, but just to give you specifics, the budget for the pay awards, so pay increases, pay inflation this financial year is 3.5% across the board. The current national employers pay offer that is being considered by the unions, I think at the moment, works out higher than that. It works out somewhere, I believe, in the region of 5% on average, although it's not a percentage increase, it's a flat increase on each pay scale. If that was applied across the board, it would be, we think, something in the region of about £3 million higher than the 3.5% we have budgeted for. There are several mitigations corporately that are offsetting that, which produce the forecast overspend in the report. So despite any level of vacancy, if you're applying the proposed pay award across the board to the employed staff, then it will produce a fairly significant pressure.
I'm sorry, but I'm looking around the room and there's an awful lot of blank faces, not just my own. So let me just take that, what you just said to me, Stephen, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm really trying to understand it. 5% is the best stroke worst situation that you've just imagined there for what's gone. So if we are 5% underfilled in our vacancies, 5% of our staff missing, I could understand that adding up, right? But fundamentally, we're about 35–40%, I understand, understaffed at this moment in time. So therefore, we're not paying those salaries. Therefore, I don't understand how we've got an overspend.
Like I say, I'm not sure of the current vacancy rate myself, but we do budget for a certain level of vacancies. Members will be aware, particularly in people services, there is a level of staff vacancy that is budgeted for on an annual basis and has been for some time. So taking that into account, as I say, the proposed pay award is higher than the budget we have available for it, which produces the forecast overspend.
Stephen Moyer is going to come in, I think.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Goldsack for the question. Just to complement some of the things the Head of Finance has said, whilst we may have some vacancies in terms of fully employed staff owned by the County Council, if you like, we are also spending money on agency workers in a number of areas, which actually increase the cost around the salaries level. So it's not a linear, we have this many vacancies, it creates that much in the way of savings. Finance colleagues, including Stephen, are estimating the impact of the pay award that's being negotiated nationally on the council's annual pay bill. That makes assumptions around the current level of vacancies, as Stephen has said. Therefore, the estimated impact on our budget next year is in the order of £3.5 million additional to that we currently planned, as he's indicated. So it's not a linear, we have this many vacancies and it offsets the pay award. The quantum of the pay award impact on our overall budget is larger than the vacancy impact that you've mentioned.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands. I've got a couple of comments, but first of all, thank you very much, Stephen, for the report. Just to come back on some of the points that Councillor Count made, particularly around the way in which the report is written and the way in which the priorities of the joint administration are reflected in reports. The priorities of the joint administration are priorities of the council. That's our job. We set the strategy, and it is therefore completely appropriate that they should be reflected within the report in the way that they are. The opposition may have different priorities and they are able to bring amendments, and then those can be debated on and discussed. And so if, for example, the opposition don't agree with us around the real living wage, you're at liberty at any point to challenge that particular part of our strategy. But that should be, those things should be reflected within the body of reports, because that's the strategy of the council. Personally, I'm extremely supportive of the idea that we should be paying the real living wage, not only because the current economic situation is such that low paid workers are really struggling to make ends meet, but at a time when we are also struggling to recruit staff, not only for our own internal staff, but also there's a huge problem with recruiting staff into the care sector more widely. I think that actually it's just sensible to be doing that in order to be able to meet our commitments to look after vulnerable people in this county. So Stephen, thank you very much for your report. That was extremely helpful. This report, I think I've closed the debate now, Councillor Count.
If I may, it's like a point of personal explanation. I think I've created some confusion with how you interpreted what I said. I wasn't saying you shouldn't have your policies in the document or recognised in the document. What I was saying was that the way that they're recognised, we don't get any financial information on the impact. So I wasn't saying real living wage is good or bad. I was saying it's recognised there as having a financial impact, but that financial impact isn't actually identified, and that'd be useful for us to have that information. Because should we decide that it's too expensive to have some of your policies, we'd have the information then to actually see what it's costing us, but that's not in there. So that was what I meant, not actually going for it or not. Whilst I have the mic, could I just comment on interest rates, which was a completely separate thing? I have argued in this committee repeatedly that we should have moved some of our short-term debt into longer times. We had one movement of £70 million on my advice, but repeatedly after that, I think that it was said that whilst money is cheap, we'll keep it there. And I think that if we'd have moved some of that money earlier, I think that some of the impacts next year wouldn't be hitting us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We will now move to the recommendations and the vote on these papers. I don't think I've heard anybody object to the recommendations, but if we could take a vote, please. All those in favour, if you could please show that. Thank you. That's unanimous. Excellent. We'll move to item 5 on the agenda, which is the adult social care IT system procurement, which I think Kirsten is introducing. Thank you,
That's
Kirsten.
correct, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. So I'm here today to ask the committee to approve 2 aspects that are held within this report. The first is the procurement of the current adult social care system, which is called Mosaic. This is the system that adult social care stores all its information about the individuals that we work with. So since Mosaic was purchased and implemented, a great deal of time and energy has been provided to embed this system across adult social care. We have multiple teams and services across our vast system, and obviously we have adapted that system so that it works best for each of those teams and services to improve our performance across the board. A great deal of time and energy has been provided to educate and train our staff in the use of this system and embed their practice. Following that, we've also had to obviously spend a great deal of time and energy to extract the raw and rich data that we have within Mosaic to help us improve our performance of our system. It helps us improve our performance of teams and services. But it also helps us meet duties such as responding to requirements such as statutory returns. They can be regional or national. For me, the biggest risk at the moment in terms of needing to re-procure or procure a system is that adult social care faces many, many challenges in the next few months and years. We have got social care reform, and we've got changes to legislation such as liberty protection safeguards. So it's really important that we have a stable and embedded platform to launch wider and more challenging changes in our system. The proposal is across a 7-year term in total. And with permission, Chair, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Chris Stromberg, who's going to talk about the second aspect of this paper, which is about data storage and data security and protection.
Thank you, Kirsten. Chris.
Thank you, Kirsten. Really fairly briefly, so along with maintaining the stability of the solution that's been embedded within the service for a fairly short period of time, and we'll be looking at moving the products to a hosted environment by the supplier, which will be in line with the IT strategy, which is also tied in with other projects to decommission elements of the data center, which currently houses Mosaic. So we'll be looking to move it to a hosted solution, and there are a number of benefits around that as detailed in the paper. If there's any further information required, please do ask.
Thank you very much. Open to members. So, Richard.
I do support these recommendations, but I think we should be honest. When the decision was taken to have a joint service with Peterborough in 2018, a hell of a lot of data was lost. And there's been a huge burden on our staff inputting data over the last years. And it is a classic example of a major IT change being brought in, and whether it's government, whether it's this council, or whether it's private enterprise. So often these big budget IT schemes go wrong, and it has in this case, and I wish there would be honesty about that in saying it. However, we are now with this provider, and I'm persuaded of the case for us to do what is being suggested. But you know, I've talked with the staff who are doing this inputting on information which should already be there, and they're having to redo, and I have great sympathy with them, and it would be good. You know, I think the report could have at least acknowledged the shortfalls of the past, rather than pretending this is all about a better scheme for the future. Having said that, I support the recommendations.
Thank you, Richard. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. We have to move forwards. This is the proposal which is on the table. We need to support it. I don't think there's any option about that. But there are dangers. And I think that Councillor Howard was quite correct when he points out it has to be said, particularly in the public sector, and it also has to be said, particularly the larger the public sector organisation is, and the NHS is the worst example of this, that IT is a potential disaster area where that potential very often is realized. We are very bad in this country. I don't know if it's unique in this country or if it happens worldwide. I don't have the knowledge about that, but certainly in this country, and particularly in the public sector, we are bad at managing IT, and we're certainly bad at managing IT change. And that's why we need to be very, very cautious when we are making IT change to make sure that we are not landing ourselves with potentially greater problems at a later stage than we currently have. And we were just told that we are moving to a hosted environment supplied by our supplier. And this is in accordance with our wider IT policy within the organization, which I do accept. But I do look at paragraph 2.4, where I see it says that we are moving to a cloud solution. Therefore, we won't need a disaster recovery option, and therefore we can reduce our disaster recovery estate. And I read that and I just wonder, and I haven't got the solution. I'm not pretending to be an IT wizard because I'm not. I just ask the question to myself, and I hope that Councillor Howard has done this from the point of view of the council and is in a position to get answers from people. Are we taking a risk there in the way in which we are saying moving to the cloud means we don't have a problem now with disaster recovery, therefore disaster recovery doesn't even need to be planned for and certainly doesn't need to be budgeted for? It just rings alarm bells, and I hope that those alarm bells are unjustified. I certainly hope nothing happens, but there's clearly some risk, and I hope that risk has been properly evaluated. Thank you, Lucy.
Chris, do you want to respond on that?
Absolutely. So at present we have, because the product is run from within our data center. If there is an issue in the data center, it needs to be run out of another data center, which in the paper that stipulates that's in West Northamptonshire. As we move to a cloud solution, disaster recovery is built into the product, so the supplier has a number of data centers. So if there is an issue with a data center that it's being run out of, primarily, then it will be run out of another one. So DR, the responsibility for delivering DR shifts to the supplier. So there is no need to not have DR. It's just moved to the supplier.
Thank you. And that much was clear from the report, and I fully appreciate and I understand the policy behind that. But I'm familiar where you have systems which are critical. I'm familiar with multiple levels of disaster recovery. So where is the disaster recovery in the sense of the provider having a problem one way or another?
So part of the procurement will be reviewing their provision of their hosted solution and ensuring that we're satisfied with the controls that they have in place. And also just understanding that disaster recovery isn't business continuity, just to separate the differences there. So if there was a situation where the product is not available, so not available at all, then the service would implement business continuity. Disaster recovery is around ensuring that the product is available to the organisation to use, and that there is no data loss, and so this product is returned back to the service within an agreed period.
Thank you, Lucy. We have to rely on the professional advice that we receive on matters such as this. Certainly, I can't challenge the professional advice we give. I just hope that we don't have to come back to this at some future stage and say, oh dear, what a shame. What do we do now?
And I'm sure we all hope that, but as you say, we have to rely on the best advice that we're given. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions for Kirsten or Chris, and then subsequent to those questions, I've got a question for Tom, if you may indulge me. So the questions I've got are about the cost. So there's a bullet point. We're seeking a 5+2 year contract term, and therefore total projected costs will be circa £3.5 million. So it was introduced as a 7-year contract. It's 5+2 is the 3.5 million for 5 years, and then the option to extend by 2, whereas the roughly 3.5 million for the 7 years. That's the first question. The second question is the very next bullet point says there will be no capital cost for the supplier. £250,000 have been included in the capital budget for internal project delivery costs. So this extra line of 250,000 reads to me as in addition to 3.5 million, but 3.5 million is described as therefore total projected cost. So I'd like some clarity on, is 250,000 capital on top of 3.5 million revenue, or is that included because it's called total? And then once I get the answer, if I could address Tom, please.
Thank you. Kirsten, are you happy to do this?
Kirsten, I'm happy to answer that if you wish. So 3.5 million is the total cost of the 7-year contract, so 5 + 2. And the 250,000 capital is in addition to the 3.5 million. So 3.5 million is projected revenue.
Thank you, Chair. Good, clear answers. Very easy to understand that. If that was written that way, I would have been very comfortable and not need to ask that, but totally happy with where we are. So I'm going to move to the recommendations though. And I've got to say that, you know, whilst I will support the recommendations, and I think this is a necessary thing, I don't like delegating unlimited amounts. So recommendation is B, to delegate the decision to award the contract to the Director of Adult Social Care, Section 151 officer in consultation with blah, blah, blah. By the way, I'd say it isn't really necessary to put in vice chair. You know, it takes over when the chair isn't there, but if you want it in there. The point is, there's no financial limits there. Now, we've heard before, you've heard me speak on this subject before, and I'm uncomfortable with that. So whilst I will pass it, the question to Tom is really, at what point do you think that if it's outside of that 3.5 million plus 250,000, you should actually say that your delegation is too much without going back to committee? Is it 5%? We had a 5% recommendation in the general, the IFMR cost paper. Would it be 5%? Would it be 10%? Would it be 50%? At what point do you think, you know what, I've got to go back to committee? Because I personally would like some kind of indication of where you're going to self-limit this if I'm going to approve an unlimited delegation. Thank you.
Chair, so what will be driven by is the approved budget. So there is an approved budget for this service, and if estimates were to come back that were to exceed that budget, we would need to necessarily come back to committees through business planning to see that revised. Councillor Camp will be aware that under the scheme of financial management that there is a delegation to officers to approve budget transfers up to 175k, but that would require identifying a compensating saving in a parallel budget. So what we're bound by is the member voted budget, and that will tie it quite closely to the figures that you see before you here.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alan.
Thank you. Just very briefly, and I share the skepticism, having worked for the Ministry of Justice for 22 years, about IT solutions, because certainly we had some ones that didn't work there. It's just touching on very briefly, and obviously we're going into the cloud, and I'm sure this has been considered, but I'm just concerned with the rising of cybercrime and hacking and everything else, that we are protected as an organisation to make sure that that's the information that's held is not getting into the wrong hands.
Thank you, Chris. Do you want to give us
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So as part of the procurement and the evaluation of the proposed solution, we'll be discussing these issues with the supplier and ensuring that our SecOps manager is satisfied with the answers provided. So it's absolutely something that we'll be considering as part of the procurement.
Thank you, Chris. Stephen.
Chair, thank you to Councillor Sharp for the question. Just to supplement what Chris has said, because he's talked about the specifics of the procurement, in general terms, cloud-based systems are actually more secure than on-premise servers that we currently use. That's certainly been my experience in procuring systems elsewhere. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to say one thing before we move to the vote, which is that there's been a lot of concern expressed about the difficulty of commissioning and procuring IT systems, and we all know cases where that's gone wrong. They are something that we all increasingly rely on in our lives, and therefore I think it's really important that we procure and commission them. And I just want to say that thank you to the staff who are doing that. I think procuring and commissioning large things is difficult, whether they're roads or IT systems, and sometimes they don't go perfectly, whether they're roads or IT systems, but we value your expertise in doing that, and we wish you luck with this procurement. So thank you very much. We'll now move to the vote. So all of those in favour of the recommendations, if you could please raise your hands. And that's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you very much to Kirsten and Chris. We will now move on to the mobile phone procurement, which I think is Kevin Halls. Kevin, thank you for being here. And Sam, also welcome. Could you put your microphone on? Sorry. The first thing to do on your first time. Welcome.
First mistake already. Yeah, this is my first time presenting, so please bear with me. We're here today to ask the committee to approve the recommendations within the paper to procure a new mobile phone contract. The current contract is due to end June of next year, and we'd like to be able to go to market with time to, if there is a mover provider, to be able to move across before June to maximise the savings available. If there's details are in the paper, but is there any major issues or questions we'd like to ask?
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Kevin? Steve?
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with the paper. Thank you very much. But I'd just like to reflect to you on my personal use of the mobile phone technology in this computer. The vast majority of time I'm forced into turning that on is when I actually use the public Wi-Fi system that's been made available. Now, you've made a change there where the repeat log on isn't required, and it seemed to be that going through the pipeline was what was causing the problem, because you couldn't log back in because of the timeline, etc. So I can't comment until I've been to a few meetings using that system as to whether I'll be using mobile telephony or not. But if my case is normal, which I understand it is, then a huge amount of this bill has been driven up by the system that was in place. So whilst I'm in favour of that, I just thought I'd feed that in as a direct response for why people are using so much mobile telephony. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any further comments on this paper? It looks as if your first experience here will be quite brief, but thank you very much for joining us. We will just move to the vote on the recommendations. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands now. Not quite unanimous, one abstention. Yes, Councillor Gough, who said at the beginning that he would be abstaining. So thank you very much indeed. And again, good luck with the procurement. Thank you. We will move to item 7, which is the business planning update from Tom and Stephen. And I'm not sure who's starting. Tom starting.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first full report on the Council's business planning outlook for 2023 to 2028 to this committee in this year's planning round. As the committee will know already from elsewhere, this is a much changed financial outlook since the budget was set in February. At that time, we had a budget gap for next year of 17.3 million, and the developments since then, I think it's fair to say, have been dominated by inflation, and that's, as we've already heard, impacted the council in different ways across energy prices, both for our street lighting and public buildings, across staff pay, the direct impact on our own workforce and the indirect impact on our external suppliers, particularly in the social care sector, and a number of other impacts as well, particularly on construction and our capital programme. Inflation on its own doubled our funding gap from 17 million to over 34 million. And the picture you see in front of you at committee today shows the mitigations the council has already identified to bring that position back down to a still very challenging budget gap of 28.6 million. committee's heard previously and will be well aware of a number of the current uncertainties and pressures we're facing looking at next year's budget. We are facing regulatory and contractual changes at our waste management plant to comply with conditions. The social care capacity constraints that we've already referred to in the meeting, the impact of the combined authorities' decisions around passenger transport and how they could impact on the levy applied to Cambridgeshire. The committee looked in detail last time at the safety valve arrangements and the large ring-fenced deficit that we currently have within our budget relating to spend on children in education with high needs. And we've talked as well around already in this meeting about borrowing costs and the refinancing impacts that we expect on the council next year. At point 1.5 in the report, we show that although the situation is currently severe, the position may worsen from this point, and there are a range of sensitivities to be aware of. Inflation, of course, continues to move quickly. We have uncertain patterns of demand for our demand-led services emerging from the pandemic. We're unclear completely, we don't have complete clarity at this stage on what council tax potentials would be. And perhaps most importantly, the public spending environment will be changeable in future. And at this point, I think we hope that will be further clarified in the Chancellor's statement scheduled for the end of October. So you see there that sensitivity shows over the whole of the MTFS the range of our budget gap between 100 and 140 million. In that context, it's really important that the council identifies a sustainable footing for council budgets looking forward. Coming into the year, the council made additional reserves provision, and but we also recognise that those are one-off funds, and the identification of new funding, new ongoing funding streams and options around service reform and changes that change and reduce the way that council spends its money in real terms will be what is required. Through this business plan, the council confirms it has a very important role to play in terms of economic recovery, prevention and early intervention, delivering on its decentralisation agenda and making essential environmental improvements. This business plan will seek to achieve those things in a very constrained financial and funding environment. But it's vital that we continue to prioritise those areas in order to address our long-term financial position. Section 3 then sets out in more detail those impacts that have led to the budget position presented today. You see both the large inflationary impact as well as some of the favourable changes that have mitigated that. So income commencing from energy schemes where the council is a generator of energy, funding changes such as in relation to the Better Care Fund and reforming the ways that the council works to realise efficiencies in expenditure. Section 4 details the capital programme at this stage and a projected increase in potential borrowing for next year of 35 million. Work is ongoing with the capital programme to prepare further prioritisation and update income expectations and manage that position downwards as part of our financial discipline. It will be apparent to the committee that this will be an extremely difficult budgeting round, and urgent work is underway across the council to progress and review options and bring forward considerations for members as part of the December cycle, and as we respond to the government's announcements at the end of October beyond that, in order to address the serious and significant financial challenges we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Stephen. Stephen doesn't need to say anything at this point. I suspect you may need to in a little while. Right, comments on this report. Are there any comments? Richard.
I hope I'm not speaking too much. It's so characteristically quiet today. I have spotted an error in this report, point 2.1. Says the Chancellor of the Exchequer is quasi-quatain. But I just advise the officers making the minutes to delay it as long as possible, because it might change again before the minutes are actually published. And as far as 2.2 is concerned, on Tuesday, the government was briefing the Times newspaper that adult social care reform would be delayed. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, again, don't minute her name, but the Prime Minister said that the reform will continue, but put no timescale on that or an amount of money. The report says that the reforms will still be funded, which is what politicians say, but we don't know how. And therefore, we can't really have any trust in whether. And we'll all see what happens on this ghoulish Halloween budget that we're all waiting for. The second point that I'm slightly concerned about in this report is in section 1.13, where the officers say that the reform proposals of this administration are subject to meeting the budget gap first. That's not what I hear officers saying in private. That's not the discussions as administration we're having with them. You know, a lot that we can do in that list there, which is a good list, by the way, of our reform actions, is about doing what we're already doing, but doing it differently rather than more expensively. And I genuinely think that's a unfortunate piece of wording in the report rather than the intention of officers or members. So as long as I've understood all of that correctly, which I hope I have, I hope the minute again can just clarify that point just in case of lack of clarity later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether, Tommy, you want to respond on any of those points? No. Okay. Do I have any other comments on this? Steve?
Thank you, Chair. On 1.5, there's a table. Basically, there's a graph. There's a fan graph, and basically the predictions used for the future fall somewhere in that fan graph. However, in the earlier years, I find it quite worrying that the predictions used are actually the very, very upper limit of the fan graph. And therefore, there's an element of, are you going to be making savings that are proved to be unnecessary because you've picked a very worst case scenario? In terms of the savings, I just want to refer to the wording in 1.6. Therefore, difficult decisions will need to be made in order to close the budget gap. The council may have to take steps to reduce the growing demand from the public for our services and may have to make disinvestments or reductions in lower priority services. So it's a bit obvious to speak, but I'll translate it. You know, it's cuts or denying services to vulnerable people and denying them access to services. And those decisions may have to be made, but it goes back to the point I made earlier on. When you make whatever decisions you're going to make to balance the budget, you have to make it in light of the fact that you made other decisions that widened the budget gap. Now, if they're your policies and strategies, that's fine, but it's always going to be a case of difficult choices, which is why I've asked if we could have the financial information for actually the impact of your choices, so that when you do make those decisions to cut services to vulnerable people, they can weigh that up and the public can weigh that up against the other decisions that you've made. In terms of the 2.2b, there's a piece of positive news on the horizon, apparently. So applications will open up soon for 2.1 billion over the next 2 years to support local authorities, housing associations, schools and hospitals invest in energy efficiency and renewable heating. I don't know if you have any influence in discussions with the DLUC as to how this will be handled, but we do hope that it will not go through the combined authority, because the combined authority has had to hand back £53 million of unspent money to government already, and there's more left to go back. And as we saw from Lord Callan's letter that I referred to in the full council debate on Tuesday, it was due to not a lack of capacity in the industry, but a lack of capacity, a lack of planning, a lack of hitting business targets at the combined authority. So please put in the applications, but let's see if we can have the applications from this council. There is highlight in the report at 2.8 about the increased budget gap because of the decision to pay the real living wage instead of the national wage. And again, I asked for information on that, facts and figures, not just actually wording around that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't think there. Yes, Elisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. So first of all, you know, we will have a full council budget meeting in February, won't we? That's when it usually happens. And please come forward and tell us that the budget gap is our own fault because we pay the real living wage. Please do that. I look forward to it. Apologies. I do apologize. I should have made 2 political points. There is one thing I wanted to bring to people's attention, which is in 2.5. Which is where it says there have been no new reports about the timing of announcement over the next 6 months, although nothing has been confirmed officially, although we're now 2 chancellors and 2 home secretaries in, so God knows. There will be no spending review in 2022. Now, I want people to be really aware. Now, this might change in the next hour, I don't know, but as at the time of drafting, there will be no spending review in 2022. That thing is massive. No spending review means that the last time the local government allocations were designed, the inflation was what, a quarter of what it is now? So we are expecting what will effectively be, and my back of the fact packet calculations might be wrong, real term cuts in the region of about 30%. And I've been trying to put things to paper about this because it's the kind of thing you usually talk about around December time in terms of the committee cycle. It is absolutely mental that you should not have a spending review in the light of what's been happening recently. We will have to actually, you know, we will have to make prioritization decisions which are going to be quite significant. And, you know, one of the, I would suggest when there is, it's been called a cost of living crisis and all of sort of reason, terminology a bit like that, but the last thing you want to do when there is a supply side spending crisis is cut wages. So once again, please do tell me how paying the real living wage is a bad idea. But the main point I was going to say is that we are if there is, I am still actually thinking that there must be a spending review in 2022, because if there isn't, we're going to be in such deep trouble. And that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question on page 71, 6.5.3, where on laptops, where we're looking at capitalising those rather than putting them through revenue. I know it's a grey area because laptops nowadays, you know, after about 2 years, they're obsolete and they go out of fact. So they tend to be. Some organisations may capitalise them, some may put them through revenue. I just wonder if there's anything else that we're thinking of capitalising in that sort of way instead of putting it through revenue.
I think the other obvious example, and we've done this before in the business plan, is look at work on the highway, what's revenue related and what's capital related. As Councillor Sharp probably knows, there's for local government, a key consideration is the asset life of what you're investing in, and by concentrating your capital expenditure on items with a longer asset life, that means you can defray it over a longer term. So we're reviewing those options given the difficult position we face, and we'll come back with recommendations on that to a later committee.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Chair, just a brief supplementary from me following Tom's comment, because it's a broader point rather than specific on laptops. Yes, as you would expect, members, we are looking at opportunities to capitalise. I suspect Tom would probably say something if I didn't, but I would just want to emphasise that it's not just the gap on the revenue budget we're concerned about for the following years. We have pressures significantly on the capital budget as well, which means we need to look at both aspects rather than just the revenue savings that clearly this paper is looking at in a greater extent. So I think it's important to emphasise both revenue and capital are under pressure. That needs to be taken into account in the business and budget planning cycle this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands. So just a couple of quick comments from me, and then I think we note the content of the report, so we don't need to take a vote. Just a couple of things. The first is that the chaos that there has been in central government and the pretty catastrophic impact of the so-called mini fiscal event have had a disastrous impact on many personal family incomes and people trying to buy houses, people trying to get mortgages. It's also had a pretty disastrous impact on the budget of this council because increased inflation and increased borrowing costs are going to mean that we have very, very difficult choices to make, and we are not going to be able to do some of the things that we would very much have wanted to do, or we'll have to do them more slowly or later. And there's not much question about that. On top of that, this summer has added a very considerable new additional level of concern around how we mitigate and try and deal with the consequences of climate change. And I'm particularly aware of the impact that that's had on our roads and is likely to continue to have on our roads. I am extremely aware of the poor state of many of our fen roads in particular as a result of the drought this summer. I would really have liked to be able to do more about that. But actually, given the budget situation, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to. And I think we all need to recognise that there is a hole in our finances, and there is also a whole lot of work that it would be very, very desirable to be able to do that actually we're going to really struggle to try and find the capacity to do. If any of the members on the Conservative side are in any way able to stabilise the situation nationally, to try and persuade any of your MP colleagues to look kindly on the budgets of local government, that would be extremely helpful, because we are going to have extremely difficult decisions to make this year. And while I am exceptionally aware of the poor situation for some of our roads, the vast majority of our budget goes on care for the vulnerable, over which we have very little control, and needs to be absolutely at the top of our priority list. So those difficult decisions are coming down the track at us. I don't think there are any. No, that's the end. We're going to move to the well, we've noted the report now. And I don't think we need a vote on this one, do we, Dan? It just needs to be noted. So we will now move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the draft anti-fraud and corruption policy and the draft anti-money laundering, which is being introduced by Mairead Claydon, who is there. Thank you, Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we're presenting 2 new policies for requesting your approval. These policies had previously not been updated since 2017, so they're in need of a refresh. And we've brought you both the before version and the after version of each policy. But as they have been fully rewritten, it's not possible to show the kind of individual changes that have been made to the policies. The changes were not really about making any significant changes to the focus or the content of the Hello? How's this? Oh, sorry. Apologies. We'll try that again. Yeah, the changes that we've made are not about kind of changing the core content of the policy or the focus. They've been focused on making policies more reader friendly, more accessible, reducing the length of the policies and the complexity, and also trying to include more information for staff on how to recognise warning signs of possible fraud or money laundering, particularly within the context of a local authority. There are some minor changes due to changing legislation and SIP for best practice guidelines, particularly in the money laundering policy. So there has been a change to the amount of cash that the council is prepared to accept in a single transaction. And we've also simplified the process for reporting concerns around money laundering, which is in line with the current best practice guide. So both policies have been to CLT, they've been to the unions and to Audit and Accounts Committee as well, as that committee has responsibility for kind of ongoing oversight of the policies. And we're now bringing them to you for your approval. If the policies are approved, the next steps will be for the internal audit team to conduct some awareness raising to ensure staff are made aware of the policies. And we're also planning to review and promote the fraud prevention e-learning that we offer to staff online. And then subsequent to that, we'll also be moving on to review the council's fraud response plan, which is a more detailed internal document that gives us information on how we respond to frauds on an individual basis. So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mairead. Any questions? Chris?
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. We advertise in this policy, and it's not a change to the policy, but we advertise that we have a zero tolerance policy so far as fraud is concerned. And that's a very good headline, and it also indicates what our attitude is. But it's not what we actually do, and it's not what we're going to be doing. We had a discussion about this at the Audit and Accounts Committee, and it was accepted that in practice we actually have a de minimis application of our anti-fraud policy. And let me give a ridiculous example about of this, because it can prove my point. Let us say that a member of staff gets a biro from the stationery cupboard, if there is such a thing anymore as a stationery cupboard, gets a biro, uses it, puts it in their pocket, takes it home and starts using it at home. Now, no one is even going to suggest for 1 second that that person is going to start being having action taken against them for fraud against us. However, if that individual is doing that with 100 biros a day and is reselling them on the internet, then no one's suggesting that we wouldn't take action. So somewhere between 1 and 100 there is a dividing line. And that dividing line is the de minimis application of our anti-fraud policy. And why is that important? Why is it important that we recognize that there is such a de minimis application? It's that when we have any potential claims for unfair dismissal against us, we've got to be able to show that we've acted consistently in the way in which we've dealt with staff. So it's really important that a staff member doesn't say, oh, well, person B was taking pens from the stationery cupboard and didn't get any action taken against them. We have to show that we act consistently. Now, this is really a matter more for the head of paid service, with all due respect to apologies to Stephen, than it is for us as councillors, because it is the way in which the management of this policy is actually put into practice. But the acceptance that there is a de minimis application of our anti-fraud policy is an important thing for us to have on record, exactly for the purpose of showing that in future, when we do act in employment cases, we're acting consistently. The one thing that I don't want our chief executive to say is what that de minimis figure is. Because let's continue with my stupid example of the pens. If the chief executive says, oh, well, up to 3 or 4 pens a day we're happy with, but not 5 or 6, then that's open season to take 3 or 4 pens a day. And most of our staff, of course, wouldn't do that, but it's just stupid to say, to advertise openly what our de minimis policy is in terms of value for quite obvious reasons. So what I'm saying is there needs to be a clear evaluation of that de minimis practical policy. The chief executive needs to give us an assurance that there is or will be such a limit, but it mustn't be made public. But it must be available for use by the chief executive and by the council if we find ourselves facing claims of inconsistency in terms of unfair dismissals. So that is it's sort of quite a challenge to the chief executive. That's my request to the chief executive, that he's able to confirm that we either do or will have an official de minimis policy, but that he won't tell us what it is.
Well, here, I think, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Bowden. You'll be pleased to hear I buy my own pens. Yes, in answer to your question. Absolutely, we should endorse this policy in the sense that we should be taking a zero tolerance approach. It is the right approach, but professional judgment and a de minimis position do have to be applied. Proportionality is a principle that has to be implied in the application of employment law, as Councillor Bowden will be aware, and reasonableness is always one of the key tests of legality in employment matters, particularly where that may relate to dismissal. So I think the yes is probably the best answer I'm going to give without going into the detail entirely, as Councillor Bowden suggested. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarity. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Mairead, just a very small point. In point 3.4 is something I've come across before, which is the Flesch-Kincaid readability checker, a wonderfully American measurement tool for seeing how it is. If you look at a British one indicates here, and I use plain words is the one that I try and look at. What it says in here, that broadsheet newspapers like the Telegraph or Guardian aim for a readability of 12 to 13-year-olds. A typical best-selling novel can be read by 8 to 10-year-olds. Now, we're either saying that 14 to 15-year-old Americans are the equivalent of that age British people, which I don't think we are saying, or could we possibly be absolutely sure that we're getting this at the right level? Because I think using an American vocabulary checker may not be the best way to go with it.
Thank you. So I'll just respond quickly to that. So the Flesch-Kincaid that we use, it is an initial indication of the kind of readability quality, and that's what's been recommended by the Council's Equality and Diversity team as a checker for kind of council documents. The issue that arises when you're writing something like an anti-money laundering policy is that the phrase anti-money laundering in itself significantly increases the age range of the document that you're writing. And so it is very easy when creating a document about a complex area that has a lot of legislative complexities to make it completely inaccessible for anyone to read. So primarily, the way that we used the checker was to try and identify things like seriously run-on sentences, move to using simpler adjectives and adverbs or avoiding them altogether, and just trying to simplify the language in a way that I think would apply equally whether you're a US school child or a UK public servant. But hopefully the outcome is still that there is a reasonable level of readability, even if the grading is perhaps not entirely correct.
Thank you very much, Mairead. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go on record as something I've already said at full council and lost the debate on. The removal of waivers for anything that doesn't have 3 bids. So there's a single bid coming, and the necessity to have a waiver, I think, is a poor decision to remove that thing, because for me it's the direct route to fraud. So you're less likely to have fraud where you have 3 bids come in than some a deliberate fraud where a cozy relationship has been set up to get 1 bid. So I just think it's a mistake. I've said that before, I've lost that argument, but I'd like to go back on record as saying it again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, that's noted. Of course, Elisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting. I wasn't going to mention Flesch-Kincaid, but I'm glad it was mentioned. And whether they be 8 or 13-year-olds, I mean, the idea that any 8 or 13-year-old, wherever they're from, can accessibly read our council papers is interesting to me. But, it's a problem that's nothing to do with this paper. The other thing I was going to ask is about, and I've lost it now, but it's where we've said that when we talk about cash and the lowering of the threshold for cash, which obviously we don't mean cash, do we? Because nobody comes with a pile of notes. We mean by bank transfers. And I think the general situation, this is a genuine question, because every time I do something different, I get different feedback about this. I had some issues when I was trying to transfer my deposit for buying my flat 10 years ago, and it was not what I would have considered an enormous amount of cash, but like the bank made it really difficult for me to make that payment. And I'm a private person with a private bank account, and I don't know quite how much of those we get into our own bank account. So what I was trying to understand is what is the rationale and what is the kind of payments that we're trying to target when we set those thresholds? Because, you know, I would expect that quite a lot of our regular payments actually very, very normally exceed massively that threshold. But at the same time, you know, when somebody's trying to pay a massively delayed bill or something, and they're trying to come in with an amount that is completely reasonable. So you see where I'm going. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, so just to clarify, when the reports, when the money laundering report specifically talks about cash, it does mean notes and coins as an amount of cash. And so that doesn't cover bank transfers. Bank transfers are inherently safer and less risky for money laundering because of the controls that are in place at the bank, essentially. And so cash is higher risk for us. The limit that's been set is, I think, 7,500, which was selected as being in line with UK guidance on money laundering, although the council is not required to adhere by that guidance. But what I would say is it's extremely unusual for the council to accept anything like that amount of cash. And one of the key points of the policy is for staff to be aware if there's any attempt to settle an account in a significant volume of cash, even if it's below the amount set in the policy. We do want to try and encourage staff to flag that as a potential risk.
Thank you. That teaches me some lesson about making assumptions when I read that. I did not expect that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think we've had quite a good discussion about this. I haven't heard anybody speak against the policy. So if we could take that to the vote now, all those in favour, if you could raise your hands. And I think that is unanimous. So thank you very much, Mairead, for all the work on it, and also for trying to make it readable, which I can see is a challenge. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We now move to the performance report, I think. Yeah. So the corporate performance report, for which we go to Tom King. Hello, Tom. Welcome.
Hello. Hi. This paper reports on a couple of points. It's a summary of the performance of corporate services up to the end of Q1 22-23 and financial year, and then it's some comments on the progress against the joint agreement actions that have been transferred to this committee's oversight. It might be helpful to highlight that there is detailed performance information in the corporate services appendix and a proposal to remove KPI 207 around total financial returns on investment, because this is already reported in two other KPIs. So 171 on county farms income and KPI 204 on financial returns on investments. Of the 18 remaining corporate services KPIs, 3 are off target by more than 10%. These are related to contract waivers, freedom of information requests, subject access requests, again related to freedom of information. Full information on commentary on these has been provided in the appendix. Happy to take any questions around this.
Thank you very much, Tom. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. May I first of all say that this report is produced in a very clear way, which provides highlighted information which should be of interest to us in a very, very straightforward manner. And it's an example of the way in which reports on quite a complicated subject, I have to say, really should be provided generally. So I'd like to give that feedback and give the congratulations for the way in which the report has been produced. Having said that, I was reading through it, and you know what it is when sometimes you're reading through something, you think, I must have misread that. And then you go back and realize you haven't. It was in paragraph 2.4.1. I'm sorry to come back to something that Councillor Count was just talking about. And in 2.4.1, which is about contract waivers, I saw the phrase, and I'll quote it directly, "The number of waivers continues at a reasonably high level." And I read that and thought, no, it doesn't. It continues at an unreasonably high level. It's not a good thing to have a high level of contract waivers. In fact, it's a bad thing. It's a sign of failure. But when I say it's a sign of failure, let's think about what contract waivers are. We have processes in place to deal with contracts and to deal with procurement. Completely correct, we do, and we have to have many layers of process within this. Again, this is something I'm sorry to say is going to be more for the chief executive than anything else, I think. So it's quite correct that we have various controls which are in place, both internal and external, only a very small number of which we as members ever get to see. Nothing wrong with that at all. But sometimes those processes, for various reasons, don't work. And sometimes it's necessary, in this particular case, to give a waiver, that is a permission to fail to observe a control for various operational reasons. When you're in that situation, there is what we call a contract waiver process. And that is perfectly proper. In fact, it's absolutely essential because it's saying the controls you've got in place haven't worked. Now we're going to have to do something else. And when you're in a contract waiver situation, it's effectively a red flag. And it's telling us, whoops, there's something which may not be quite right here. We'd better give it greater attention than we otherwise would have done had it gone through the process in the way it normally would have done. And in fact, procurement generally, and contracts in particular, provide for local government the greatest risk of significant financial fraud that there is. It's just a general fact. So it's quite correct for us to be told about contract waiver numbers, and I appreciate it's been shown in this because it allows us to highlight this particular point. Now, I have to say I'm disappointed that it's still the case that there are contract waivers for where it's necessary to be, where we've got they're submitted fewer than 5 days before the proposed end date of the previous contract and the start date of a new contract. It's disappointing that there are any situations still like that. But being realistic about it, being honest about it, sometimes circumstances happen, and I could name some, but there's no need, where that's totally outside your control and it's forced on you. I fully accept that. Other cases, it's not. It's down to our failings. And some of the ways of dealing with that are mentioned in the report about how we're going to try to have better planning about when contracts finish and also make sure that we have better training for our staff. All well and good. It still won't totally stop the need for contract waivers because sometimes there are things which are outside our control. But I was disappointed to read that one of the ways we are congratulating ourselves that the number of contract waivers will be reduced is the very point that Councillor Count made, that if fewer than 3 bids have been received, then we'll remove the need for a contract waiver. And that cannot be right by itself. We accept that this is an area which is of greater potential fraud than would normally be the case. That's the whole reason we have a contract waiver policy. If you have fewer than 3 bids received, there is an even greater danger than would normally be the case of collusion. And yet, we have what we've decided to do is to remove the need for a waiver in those circumstances. Now, again, this is my challenge as much as anything else to the chief executive, but I'm more than happy for any other answer to be given. If that's to stop having a contract waiver, we must have a robust system in place, which is at least as robust as the contract waiver system, to enable that particular situation to be looked at. In fact, it needs to be more robust than the existing contract waiver position because of the unusual nature of having fewer than 3 bids received and a decision having to be made, and you've got fewer than 5 days before the proposed start date. So my first question is there a more robust system which has been put in place than we previously had with the contract waiver system? And the second is, if there is such a system, or when there is such a system, could we please have a report made available to us on that so we know when that's been used? Because certainly as members, we would want to know that it's an area of real vulnerability. The alternative, of course, is to reverse the idea that when there are fewer than 3 bids received, we don't have a contract waiver process go through. We could just reverse that. But if we're not going to reverse it, we must have something in place. We must have the assurance that there is something in place which is stronger, and we need to be reported to on that. Thank you, Lucy.
Do you want to respond on that, Tom? Or not particularly? Fine. Okay, thank you. Stephen, do you want to?
Chair, I'm looking at Tom Kelly at the moment. He may wish to respond in the first instance, given that commercial and procurement sits with him. And obviously we're continuing to improve that, having aligned the commercial and procurement teams into one area rather than 2 as previously. So Tom Kelly might want to respond in the first instance. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I largely agree with the thrust of the points that Councillor Bowden makes. I would though add a couple of things about in context. The changes that were made to the contract procedure rules and the additional attention that this area has been given were the result of quite serious findings of procurement weaknesses that our external auditor identified, and Councillor Bowden is very familiar with. So with that in mind, there were two particular issues. Firstly, the council's record keeping had been poor. And the issue there was that actually staff were not completing waivers at all. So in that sense, it's good to know that we want to see a certain level of waivers, because as Councillor Bowden alludes to, sometimes they're necessary in the course of business, and we want visibility of that. So in that sense, it's positive. And we also needed a laser-like focus on the legislation, the public contracting rules, and flowing that down into when a waiver from those regulations is needed. It isn't when you don't, it doesn't focus on when you have followed the competitive process, and that's where the emphasis is. Officers must follow a competitive process to be in compliance with the regulations, or they need a waiver, rather than the results after that competitive process. I think there are a number of other enhancements that have been made as part of those changes as well. Some of that you see by having the visibility of this report at this committee, and listing out where those individual waivers have been made. Those are the main points I'd make. This is an area that's receiving ongoing attention, and we'll continue to take account of the views of all members on this.
Thank you. Chris, yeah.
I'm very grateful for that answer, and I accept everything that Tom has said. There are improvements which are being made. There are faults which were uncovered, and action is being taken on those, and I fully support all of that. Completely correct. But this is an area where we've almost created a loophole in that work that we've done. This is one area where we've gone backwards rather than forwards, unless there is some other system which is in place to be able to control this. Now, if we've received fewer than 3 bids for a service which is costing £10,000, it's a very different matter from one which costs £10 million. And I am just concerned that the way in which this removal of the contract waiver has been introduced means that we have potentially opened a door which we needn't have opened, but if we do open it, then we need to find another way of closing that door, and preferably giving greater attention to this area, because there is a potential area of risk. And maybe I do need to ask for the Chief Executive to respond. I know he knows exactly what I'm getting at here, and I'm sure he'll give me a reassuring answer to my specific question. Quite apart from the fact I accept overall, we're going into a stronger position now than we were before.
Well, Chair, rather than get into a detailed response to Councillor Bowden, I think, first of all, I agree with Tom's comments. His points are well made and well understood. I would suggest that as part of our ongoing improvements to the procurement function, we need to take that further and revisit some of those considerations. So I think that's probably the best answer I'm going to give at the moment, but I absolutely understand the point being made, and also agree that relative to the earlier debate on fraud, corruption and money laundering, we need to ensure our controls are as robust as possible, particularly given some of the previous external audit judgments this council's received. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. I'm also going to add that I think that sometimes when we don't get bids for contracts, it's also an indication of places where the market is failing or not functioning properly, and that is also something that we as a council might want to be aware of, which I think is also picked up in Stephen's comment. Mark.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one, Tom 1 or Tom 2, I'm not quite sure. Tom, the indicators 205 and 206, I mostly welcome. I think they will be very good. There's no indication on when. You've shown us, you've teased us by saying you're going to be looking at social value achieved and at the amount of spend that we're spending with local suppliers, but there's nothing on there that tells us when any information is coming.
Yeah, we're for both of those KPIs, they're going to be benchmarked for. We're going to get benchmarking information throughout this financial year and then start reporting on it within the next financial year. That's the current assumption.
Beautifully clear. Any further questions? Richard.
I completely agree with Councillor Bowden about the risks on contract extensions and the risk of collusion. I think those are very proper points to make. But I think that all should also be balanced up about why we're doing some of these things. Certainly in my committee, first of all, every contract extension is scrutinised and it's in public. I praised Tom Kelly for his answer, by the way. I think the way we drove the bad side out of the system is being open and honest about it. And I thought your explanation was excellent. And that's the sort of openness that we want. But where we've extended, where we've done contract waivers at least in my committee, it's often been about COVID having really disrupted the service and it just not being the time to change just as the services are recovering. And sometimes, and Councillor Bowden will recall this, it's been about if we change the contract just at this point, it jeopardises us being able to claim down government grant, which is clearly against the interest of the council taxpayer in Cambridgeshire. And so I think it is important. Obviously, we should be very, very strong against any potential for corruption or collusion. But I think we should make the point that positive decisions can be made about contract waiver. And I wouldn't quite use exactly the same words as you, Leader and Chair. Where the market doesn't provide bids at the moment or tenders, it's because there's an economic crisis in our country. And the sorts of money that we're able to pay sometimes aren't what is attractive to companies. And that's an economic reality of the moment that is the fault of the system, isn't the fault of the individuals. And so I think we need to put that context here. If most of the contracts were being waived most of the time, it would be failure. But I'm not sure we are in that position. And I think the positive case for when we do this needs to be heard. The only other point I'd make on this report is about the freedom of information requests. I accept what's in the report, but I have to say I want us to go further and faster. You know, the idea is just that the IT isn't quite good enough and somebody left their job and there's a new one. That doesn't really do it for me. I do think that we need a stronger will in the council that openness and transparency is a good thing, that we're prepared to accept our shortfalls, that the responding to FII requests within the time limit isn't just a compliance issue, it's actually a desirable issue for us to be honest with the public that we seek to serve. And so I would like more robust language around how we deal with that KPI. We have inherited as administration a system where this hasn't been a priority, and we're going to try and make it a priority in different ways. And I think that should be said, not simply the comments that appear in the appendix to this report.
Thank you. Noted. Neil.
Yeah, I think KPIs are really useful things, and actually I really like the way in which these have been presented. It does strike me in the spirit of kind of making sure we learn and we act on these KPIs that where we've got deviations in performance, looking at the actions. One of the things which I'd kind of like to see is a bit more context as to what those levels of performance in other authorities are. That gives us some indication to what extent we've got a problem which we need to fix internally, or whether it is a sort of broader issue. So I'd just like to commend the use of some benchmarking around some of these KPIs, not across the whole board, but where we actually have some issues which we need to address.
Thank you. Stephen wants to come in, I think.
Chair, a couple of things. First of all, on the point of benchmarking, I think we've heard that from members from across a number of parties. Councillor Count made the reference to benchmarking earlier in relation to some of the KPIs. A couple of comments on benchmarking. Some of that information is already available to us through the East of England Local Government Association. Otherwise, benchmarking, in my experience, requires us to join a benchmarking club of some form, which has a cost attached to it. Therefore, we have to decide whether or not that's a value for money exercise to do. We do have some comparative performance information, for example, in the area of freedom of information, because we share a service currently around information governance with Peterborough City Council. And actually, Chair, back to the point I wanted to pick up, Councillor Howitt's comment. In terms of freedom of information requests, I'll be quite clear, that's not an IT deficiency. That's a performance failure. And that's something that CLT have scrutinised within the last couple of weeks. I have to say the head of information governance is very clearly aware of the need to improve performance in that area and has actually been drawing upon the better performance that Peterborough City Council have been delivering to ensure that Cambridgeshire comes up to standard. So that's not an IT deficiency, that is genuinely a performance improvement requirement. And just to Councillor Howard's point, no, we absolutely recognise that it's not just a statutory compliance issue. It is about being open and transparent and ensuring that information is available where it's appropriate to make it available. So I think it was just worth reassuring members and, dare I say, the public on webcast that we are absolutely clear performance needs to improve in that area, and that has been conveyed very clearly to the team concerned and is being supported by the head of information governance, who has good experience of turning around performance in that area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I want to touch on the health of the organisation, its relevance and the usefulness of these KPIs in measuring that. So we've heard a lot today. In fact, the very first paper, agenda item number 4, I spoke a lot about the vacancies in the workforce and the impact that has on the delivery of services. But another impact of a vacancy in the workforce is often somebody else has to cover that person's position. You know, I know with the local highways officers, the shortage there, so many of them are saying, oh, well, you just got to cover 2 patches and do the best that you can. And this must be rife across the board, which leads to one of the KPIs, which is probably one of the saddest things I've read in a long time, saying that only 59% of staff feel valued. 59%. Now that is really quite a sad figure. And when we think about turnover and that has to be a contributory factor, that if people don't feel valued going to work, then they're going to stop. They're going to find something else. Now we know that we can blame things like such as the finance. Are they being paid enough? That's one thing. But there are many factors that go into that, and looking around at empty desks around you and realizing you've got to pick up their workload is one. This feeds into another indicator, 213, full-time employee days lost to anxiety, mental health, depression, sheer absence, stress absence. I mean, we look at that, the direction of travel is going up and up and up. And I actually asked for some information to backtrack it. So in 2020, with 6,000 full FTE days gone missing a year, and now it's 10,000. That's a raise of 2/3, 67%, 4,000 FTE days lost a year, more than 2 years ago. And I think that actually relates to that 59% of staff feeling valued. So we know that there's some work going on in the children's workforce area, but I must point out that I asked a separate question at full council in the written questions as to what the highways is doing over and above what they normally do in terms of staff recruitment and retention. And it was very much what we've done is we've replaced certain people who are developing something moving forwards. I feel that this problem is so deep and so ingrained. I know there are national issues. I understand that, but I just feel like if you can get a hold of this a bit better, the staff retention, staff recruitment issue a little bit better, and not just say it's a national issue, then some of the other issues you're facing across this council may start to disappear. There's classic examples, even in this corporate performance report. The money that you're raising from advertising and sponsorship is down, not just because of the policy changes that you made, but also due to capacity issues. So you're actually missing out on money on the non-delivery of the solar farms in time. You're missing out on money. So some of your problems will go away if you go back to core values and what we can get to keep our staff working for us and make them feel valued. We've just heard I wouldn't say an attack, that's probably too harsh. Some harsh words about the delivery. There was no attention to the delivery of the key performance indicator on the freedom of information things. Sue Grace, I'm looking across at Sue Grace. Sue Grace has been here for a number of years. You will have heard me many times at meetings saying the same words as Richard Howard, and that would have been relayed through you and through the former executive, and various things go wrong. But what I never did, I never did was turn around and blame officers. And that is where we feel that staff value we've got to start off here, embrace our officer cadre, not pick holes in them, and actually hold ourselves up to account first so we can actually tell them they are valued, they are important, they're doing a great job, and try and get our staff recruitment and retention up. So thank you very much, Chair.
Chair, thank you. And first of all, if I may say to Councillor Count, I fully endorse the point about our staff needing to feel valued. I'm sure all county councillors would agree, because of course that's a collective responsibility of members as the employer. Equally, in terms of the performance statistic that's being referenced, that feeling valued statistic relates to June 2021. As members will note from the detailed appendix to the report, we are currently reviewing how we undertake our employee engagement surveys, because the depth and richness of that information could be further improved, in my view. Given some of my professional background, members may be aware that this is something I have some expertise in, so I'm looking at who best and how best to deliver employee engagement surveys going forward. The previous survey was not as robust, in my opinion, as it could have been, so we will have to look at that. I think we're committed from memory to revisiting employee engagement in January 2023, according to the appendix. So I think I endorse Councillor Count's point. Staff feeling valued is an important precursor to recruitment, retention, and dare I say, better quality service delivery. So I fully endorse that comment, and we will obviously come back to members when we've had a more up-to-date position on employee engagement, staff feeling valued in due course. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands, which I have to say is slightly a relief. I'm going to finish this by a point which follows on rather neatly from Councillor Counts. We've had quite a lot of discussion in these KPIs about the things that are not going quite as well as we would have liked them to. And that's completely appropriate, because as a council that want to improve all the time, we want to be focusing on the things that are that could be improved. But I did just want to end by drawing everybody's attention to indicator 190, which is the proportion of information inquiries resolved at the first point of contact, which is 84.1% and rising and blue. I think that's a really important indicator, and a really massive credit to our contact centre team, who are quite often the unsung heroes in this council. And I just thought that this would actually be an appropriate moment to say thank you to them for that indicator and for the work that's done on it, and to so maybe Sue could pass that back, because I think it is also really important to note the good things that we see coming through this report, as well as the things that are less good. On which note, if we could agree the recommendations. I'm just trying to think if I think we do need to vote on them, because there are some additions and removals. So all those in favour of the report, if you could please show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Dan, we ought to have a break now. I'm just wondering whether if we do the final item, then we can move to the private session. Then it all fits in the same thing. So are you willing for us to do that? Okay, thank you. In which case we'll move to item 10 on the agenda, which I hope we can take relatively briefly.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing further to add to the report that's set out in the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you. Are we all happy to note the agenda plan and training? Any comments? Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Dan. So we will now move to the exclusion of the press and public, and then we will have a short break while we stop the live stream. So we are moving to exclude the press and public because item 12 is a confidential item. I resolved that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. Could I have a seconder for moving into private session, please? Thank you, Tom. And could we all vote on whether we move into private session? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. So as we move into private session, I think if we had a 15-minute break and we were back at 12:29 or 12:30, depending on whether you want Lorna's version, I'll see you all in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.